I didn't even notice the cold rain soaking through my blouse until it clung to my skin like a second layer. The streetlights blurred in the downpour, casting long reflections on the wet pavement as I walked faster, trying to outrun the memory of that dinner table. My hair was plastered to my face. My shoes squeaked with every step, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. Only hours ago, I believed I was about to start a new chapter of my life. Tyler Grant, the man I had been dating for nearly a year, had invited me to dinner with his parents. He said it with that easy smile of his, the one that always melted my doubts. "It's time you meet them, Nat. You're important to me." Those words had echoed in my head as I stood in front of the mirror earlier that evening, carefully choosing my outfit and telling myself that maybe this was it. Maybe he was planning to propose soon, but nothing prepared me for what I walked into. The Grants were wealthy. Wealthy in a way I had only seen in magazines. Their house wasn't just big. It looked like something out of an architectural digest. The dinner table was long enough to seat 20, even though only 4 of us sat there. And from the moment I said hello, I felt like I had stepped into a world I didn't belong to. His mother's eyes swept over me like a scanner, calculating and cold. His father's handshake was firm, polite, but there was no warmth behind it. I tried to smile, tried to breathe, tried to ignore the tightening knot in my stomach as they began asking questions. Not the kind meant to get to know me, but the kind meant to measure me. Where did I go to school? Why just a vocational college and not a university? Wasn't tailoring a bit limiting as a career? Did my family own property, or did we rent? Each answer seemed to lower their already shallow impression of me. And Tyler, he just sat there shifting uncomfortably but never speaking up. Not once did he say, "She's amazing and I love her," or even, "Mom, Dad, that's enough." He kept his eyes down as if embarrassed. I left before dessert. I couldn't sit there another second, pretending I wasn't breaking inside. I had hoped, stupidly maybe, that Tyler would follow me, that he would take my hand and say he didn't care what they thought, but he didn't. I walked out alone into the storm, and he stayed behind. Now here I was, trudging through the rain, clutching my purse to my chest as if it could hold my dignity together. I thought about heading straight home, but I couldn't. Not yet. My mom, Susan, has a heart condition. Stress is dangerous for her, and she's always been sensitive to my moods. I couldn't just walk in crying. Couldn't let her see the humiliation written all over my face. She's been through enough already. She doesn't need to carry my heartbreak too. So I kept walking until I saw the warm lights of a small 24-hour coffee shop on the corner. I ducked inside, shaking water from my hair and wiping at my face, pretending it was only rain that streaked my cheeks. The smell of roasted coffee beans wrapped around me like a blanket, and for a moment, I let myself breathe. But then it hit me. This wasn't just about Tyler or his parents. This was about me. About every time I told myself I wasn't good enough because I didn't have a fancy degree or a trust fund. About every late night I had spent at the sewing machine, building a dream so small I thought it barely counted. And about how I had pinned so much hope on someone who, when it really mattered, stayed silent. I curled my hands around a steaming cup of coffee and stared out at the rain. It blurred everything: cars, lights, people rushing by, but it couldn't blur the truth I was finally beginning to see. This wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the brutal, messy beginning of something I hadn't yet imagined. When I was a little girl, it was just me and Mom. No brothers, no sisters, no dad waiting at the door when we came home. My father had left before I could even form a memory of him, and Mom never spoke ill of him. She just said some people aren't ready to love the way a family needs. That was all I needed to know. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Des Moines, Iowa. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Or rather, it was rented and decorated with love, which sometimes feels like the same thing. Mom worked as an administrative assistant at a small insurance firm, always juggling paperwork and phone calls with a calm smile on her face. Even on days when I could see how tired she was, she would come home, hang up her coat, and ask, "So, Nat, what did you dream about today?" Her heart condition wasn't something I understood as a child. I just knew she would get winded climbing stairs or have to sit down when her chest tightened. As I grew older, I realized how fragile she really was and how strong at the same time. Doctors had told her years ago not to risk pregnancy because of her weak heart, but she decided life without me wasn't worth living. She always said, "I wanted you, Natalie. You were my dream before you were even born." Because of her health, I learned early on to be independent. While other kids were out riding bikes until dark, I was learning to cook simple dinners or folding laundry so Mom wouldn't have to push herself. It never felt like a burden. She had given me everything she could, and helping her back felt natural. What Mom gave me most, though, was creativity. She was the one who taught me to sew when I was 9. She had an old Singer sewing machine, loud and stubborn, that clanked and squeaked, but still turned fabric into something beautiful. I remember sitting at that machine, my feet barely reaching the pedal, sewing crooked lines on scraps of old fabric while Mom clapped like I had just finished a runway show. She would always say, "Your hands are gentle, Nat, and that means you'll make something beautiful out of this world." By the time I hit high school, I knew I wanted to design and make clothes. Not big fashion lines or glossy magazines, just simple, elegant dresses that made real women feel special. I didn't have the money or the grades for a fancy design school, but I enrolled in a vocational program right after graduation. People sometimes looked at me funny when I said I was going to be a seamstress, like it wasn't ambitious enough. But Mom's eyes would light up every time she saw me working, and that was enough. We didn't have much money, and I'll admit, sometimes it was hard. There were Christmases when the gifts were handmade and birthdays when dinner was just spaghetti and bread. But we laughed a lot. We made jokes about our squeaky old couch, painted the kitchen cabinets ourselves one summer, and turned the living room into a makeshift runway when I finished my first real dress. Still, there were nights when I could hear Mom crying softly in her room, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't notice. I knew she worried about the future, about what would happen if her heart got worse, about how I'd take care of myself if something happened to her. And even though I was young, I promised myself I'd find a way to make life better for us. That promise is why I worked so hard, why I took extra shifts at the alteration shop, why I rarely went out. Meeting Tyler felt like the universe rewarding me for all of that effort. He made me feel seen, like someone finally understood that I wasn't just some girl with a sewing machine. And maybe that's why his silence at dinner hurt so much, because it shattered not just the idea of him, but the idea that all my hard work had finally brought me to someone who valued me. Mom didn't know any of this yet. She only knew I'd gone out to meet someone important and hadn't come home with the glow she expected. She was waiting, fragile and hopeful, completely unaware that her daughter's heart had just been cracked open. But I wasn't ready to tell her not yet. She had enough on her plate, and soon I'd find out she had more to face than either of us realized. I still remember the first time I met Tyler Grant like it was yesterday. It was at a small fundraising dance my friend Lily had begged me to attend. I almost didn't go. I was tired from working a double shift at the alteration shop, and I didn't own anything that felt worthy of a fundraiser. But Lily insisted, and I gave in, pulling out a simple navy dress I'd made myself months earlier. The venue was beautiful. String lights wrapped around pillars, soft jazz floating through the air, people mingling in suits and dresses that cost more than my monthly rent. I felt out of place the moment I walked in, clinging to a plastic cup of punch like it was my shield. And then Tyler walked over. He wasn't like the others, not at first glance. He didn't flash that arrogant smirk I'd seen on some of the guys there. Instead, he had this warm, confident smile, like he actually wanted to talk to me. His dark hair was neatly styled, his suit obviously custom, but there was something easy about him. "Is this your first time at one of these?" he asked, leaning slightly so I could hear him over the music. I nodded, smiling nervously. "Is it that obvious?" He grinned a little. "But that's not a bad thing. Sometimes the people who don't belong at these things are the most interesting ones here." I laughed, feeling an unexpected spark. We talked for what felt like hours that night about my job, his studies at a business school, our favorite places to eat in the city. He didn't seem fazed when I said I was a seamstress. In fact, he looked impressed. "You actually make clothes? That's amazing. I can barely sew a button back on." From that night, things moved quickly. He called the next day, took me out for coffee, then dinner, then movies. Tyler had this energy about him. Like life was a game he'd already figured out how to win. He came from money that was clear, but he never rubbed it in my face. He drove a nice car, wore watches worth more than my entire wardrobe. But he still laughed at my thrift store jokes and claimed he liked my home-cooked meals better than anything fancy. For months, I let myself believe I'd found someone who saw me, really saw me. Someone who didn't care that I didn't have a degree from some big-name university or a family name worth dropping at cocktail parties. But there were small signs I ignored, like how he never really invited me to his family's gatherings, or how he changed the subject when I asked about his parents. "They're private," he'd say. "You'll meet them eventually." And I held on to that eventually like it was a promise. I imagined meeting them and proving I was worthy, that I wasn't just some girl with a sewing machine, but someone who could build a future with their son. Tyler seemed to like my independence, at least on the surface. He'd watch me work late at the shop, sometimes stopping by to bring me coffee, saying, "You're the hardest working person I know." Those moments felt real. He even talked about travel plans, New York for the holidays, maybe a road trip next summer. I thought he was serious about us. Looking back, I wonder if he ever was, because when he finally said, "It's time you meet my parents," I thought it meant he was ready to take the next step. But maybe it was just a box he needed to check off. One more thing to make his life look complete. I told Mom the night before the dinner. She smiled so big it nearly brought tears to my eyes. "See, I told you good things happen to good people, Nat," she said, touching my cheek softly. I didn't tell her how nervous I was about impressing his parents, about not being enough. The truth was, I was terrified, but I wanted to believe in Tyler and us. That's why I said yes. Why I put on that soft peach blouse I'd sewn myself, why I rehearsed polite conversation in my head on the way there. I had no idea how much that one night would change everything. When Tyler told me his parents wanted to meet me, my first reaction was excitement, quickly followed by panic. "Friday night at our family place," he said casually, like it was no big deal. "Just dinner, Nat. They'll love you." I smiled and nodded, but inside I felt the weight of it settle like a stone in my stomach. His parents owned multiple businesses across Iowa, auto dealerships, real estate investments, even a stake in some tech company. They weren't just comfortable. They were the kind of wealthy that made headlines when they donated to charities. And me, I was just a girl who fixed wedding dresses and hemmed pants for people who couldn't afford to buy new ones. Still, I tried to look on the bright side. Maybe they'd see how hard I worked, how independent I was. Maybe they'd see I cared for Tyler for who he was, not for what he had. Friday came with a steady drizzle that refused to stop all afternoon. I wore a soft blue dress I'd made from a discounted fabric bolt months earlier, simply yet elegant, paired with modest heels. I couldn't afford a taxi, and Tyler had been tied up at work, so I decided to take the bus across town. That's when I saw her. The bus was nearly empty, but at the front a frail woman in a tan coat and knitted hat stood, clutching an old fabric bag. She was arguing quietly with the driver, her voice trembling. "I just need to get to the hospital. My grandson's there. I'll pay you back tomorrow, I swear." The driver shook his head. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I can't let you ride without fare." People looked away, pretending not to hear, but I couldn't. Something about the way she stood there, trying so hard to maintain her dignity, even as tears welled in her eyes, hit me in the chest. I stood up and walked over, fishing out enough for 2 fares. "Here," I said softly, handing the driver the bills. The woman turned to me, startled. "Oh no, sweetheart, I can't. It's fine," I said, smiling. "Just sit down. You said hospital, right? Which one?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Mercy General. My grandson had an accident. They say he'll be okay, but I need to be there." I nodded. "Then you definitely shouldn't be standing here arguing for a moment." Something like relief crossed her face, and she grasped my hand. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," I replied, moving back to my seat. She sat across from me, still holding her bag tightly. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice quiet but warm. "I'm Jeanette Miller, and you are Natalie. Natalie Cooper." She smiled faintly. "Natalie, you've got a kind heart. The world doesn't see enough of that anymore." We rode in silence for a while. After that, the only sounds the hum of the bus and the rain tapping against the windows. She got off 3 stops before mine, turning to wave at me. "I'll remember this, sweetheart," she said. I smiled back, thinking it was just something people said. At the time, I had no idea how much that moment would matter. By the time I arrived at the grand estate, the drizzle had turned into a full downpour. Their house loomed like a mansion straight out of a movie. Columns, landscape gardens, even a fountain at the front. I paused at the gate, took a deep breath, and told myself to hold my head high. I could do this. Inside, I wiped raindrops from my dress, rehearsing polite greetings in my head. Smile, shake hands, compliment the home. Don't talk too much about work unless they ask. I thought the hardest part of the evening would be my nerves. I didn't realize it would be something far worse. Something that would make the bus ride, the rain. Even the worry about my dress seemed so small. The butler. I didn't even know people actually had butlers. Opened the door and ushered me into a foyer so big it could have held my entire apartment twice over. Marble floors, a chandelier dripping with crystal, and a staircase that curved like something out of a historical drama. I smoothed the skirt of my dress and tried to swallow the lump in my throat. Tyler came down the stairs, smiling that easy smile I'd fallen for. "You made it," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. For a moment I relaxed. Maybe I'd overthought this. Maybe his parents really would welcome me. He led me into the dining room, where his parents were already seated at a table long enough to host a small wedding. His father, tall and broad-shouldered, rose slightly to shake my hand. "Miss Cooper," he said, polite but distant, like he was greeting a business associate he didn't plan to see again. His mother, in a flawless cream blouse and pearls that probably cost more than my car, gave me a once-over and a smile so tight it could have cut glass. "Natalie, is it? We've heard some things." Her voice trailed off like there was more she wanted to say, but decided not to yet. I smiled, pulling out a chair. Thank you for inviting me. Your home is beautiful. His mother tilted her head slightly. Yes, we do our best. She didn't ask me to sit. She just went back to adjusting her napkin. Dinner started with small talk. The weather, some local charity gala they were sponsoring, a new investment Tyler's father was making. I tried to add little comments here and there, but every time I did, there was a pause, a glance between them, the kind of glance that says, she doesn't belong here. Then came the questions. So, Natalie, his mother began, her fork clinking softly against her plate. You're a seamstress. Yes, I said, forcing cheerfulness into my tone. I design and alter dresses, mostly bridal and formal wear, but I'm hoping to expand into custom evening gowns. She murmured. And where did you go to school for that? I went to a vocational college here in Des Moines, I replied. Her lips curved into something that might have been a smile, but wasn't. Oh, not a 4-year university. I felt my face warm. No, ma'am. I chose a faster program so I could start working and helping my mom sooner. Helping your mother? Tyler's father interjected, his tone curious but edged. Is she unwell? I hesitated, wondering how much to say. She has a heart condition. I live with her, so I can help when she needs it. His mother's eyes flicked toward Tyler, then back to me. How admirable, she said flatly. The rest of dinner continued in that same rhythm. Questions that weren't really questions, compliments that felt like tiny cuts. Do you rent or own your apartment? How many clients do you have? Have you ever considered changing careers? It wasn't what they said. It was how they said it. I could feel myself shrinking with each passing minute. And Tyler, he just sat there. He laughed at his father's jokes, nodded when his mother spoke, but he never once stepped in to say, she's amazing, and I love her. He didn't defend me, didn't ease the tension, didn't even look me in the eye when I tried to catch his gaze. By the time dessert was served, my appetite was gone. I placed my napkin on the table and forced a smile. Thank you so much for dinner. I'm afraid I need to get going. Early morning at work tomorrow. His mother's expression didn't change. Of course, it was enlightening to meet you. I stood clutching my purse, waiting, hoping for Tyler to follow me, to at least ask if I was okay. But he stayed seated, murmuring something to his father, as if I'd already left. So I walked out alone. The rain outside had turned heavier, but I didn't care. Each drop masked the tears spilling from my eyes. I wrapped my arms around myself and started walking, the sound of my heels slapping against the wet pavement drowning out the ache in my chest. Somewhere deep down, I knew that night wasn't just a bad dinner. It was the end of something I had believed in, and maybe in its own painful way, the beginning of something else entirely. When I finally made it home that night, I stood in the hallway for a full minute, trying to force a smile onto my face before opening the door. My mom's health was fragile, and the last thing she needed was to see her daughter broken and dripping, wet like a character in some tragic movie. I took a deep breath, wiped my face with my sleeve, and stepped inside. Nat, is that you? Mom called from her bedroom. Her voice carried the same gentle warmth it always had, but there was a hint of fatigue underneath. Yeah, Mom, just got in. I kicked off my soaked heels and tried to sound cheerful. It's pouring out there. I think I set a new record for walking in heels. She chuckled softly. That's my girl. Did everything go well tonight? I hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. Yeah, it was fine. Just tired, that's all. I could hear the rustling of her blankets as she shifted in bed. You work too hard, sweetheart. Don't forget to rest. I won't, Mom, I said, heading straight to the shower before she could see my face and ask the questions I wasn't ready to answer. Under the hot water, I let myself cry again quietly so she wouldn't hear. The sting of humiliation from Tyler's silence, the cold judgment in his mother's eyes, all of it spilled out and swirled down the drain. For the next few days, I threw myself into work, hoping that if I stayed busy enough, the ache would fade. But life, it seems, had more storms waiting. One morning, I found Mom sitting at the kitchen table, pale and holding her chest. "Mom, what's wrong?" I rushed to her side and she tried to wave me off, just a little dizzy. It happens, but I could see the truth in her eyes. She was scared too. We went to her cardiologist that afternoon, and after several tests, we were referred to a specialist at Mercy General. He was kind but direct. "Your mother's condition has worsened significantly. The medication is no longer enough. She needs surgery." And soon my heart dropped. Surgery? How soon? Within the next month? Ideally within weeks. Without it, her risk of heart failure increases drastically. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, how much will it cost?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. For someone uninsured at this level, we're looking at, well, somewhere in the range of $80 to $100,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. That was more than I made in 2 years, maybe 3. "Is there any assistance program?" "There are charity programs and grants," he said, "but most are targeted toward pediatric cases or certain demographics. I can give you a list of foundations to contact," but his voice softened. "Be prepared for it to take time." Time. That was the one thing we didn't have. That night, I sat at our tiny kitchen table long after Mom went to bed, staring at the crumpled list of phone numbers and websites the doctor had given me. I called every single one over the next few days, explaining our situation, begging for help. Some were polite but firm. "We're not taking new adult cases at this time." Others didn't even return my calls. One woman sighed and said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but this just isn't the kind of story donors open their wallets for. If you had young kids at home or some tragic accident, people react differently." I wanted to scream. My mom's life was on the line. Wasn't that enough? Finally, out of desperation, I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I called Tyler. He picked up on the second ring, sounding surprised. "Nat." "Hey, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "Tyler, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious," I said quickly, my voice already shaking. "My mom needs surgery, heart surgery, and we don't have the money." I thought maybe," I swallowed. "I thought maybe you could lend me some just until I figure something out. I'll pay you back every cent." There was silence on the line, then a quiet laugh. "Nat, come on. Really?" I knew something like this would happen eventually. My mom literally warned me about this exact thing. She said if we split, you'd probably find some excuse to Tyler. "That's not what this is," I interrupted, tears burning my eyes. "I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for my mom's life. Yeah, well, I'm sorry she's sick, but I'm not a bank. Don't call me again, okay?" And with that, he hung up. I stared at my phone, the words still echoing in my ears. Don't call me again. For the first time in years, I felt completely powerless. My world had narrowed to 2 impossible choices: watch my mom's health decline or find a miracle. And miracles, at least in my experience, didn't show up on cue, but sometimes kindness has a way of circling back when you least expect it. 2 days after Tyler hung up on me, I sat on a bench outside Mercy General, my head buried in my hands. I'd spent the morning at work, but couldn't focus, so I left early. Mom was inside getting pre-op testing, though we still didn't know how we would pay for the surgery. I stared at the cracked pavement, feeling like life had just pulled the rug out from under me. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Sweetheart, Natalie, is that you?" I looked up, blinking through tears. Standing in front of me was the elderly woman from the bus, the one I had bought a ticket for days earlier. Her tan coat was the same, her eyes still soft but now brighter. "Mrs. Miller," I said, surprised. She smiled and reached for my hands. "I told you I'd remember you. Are you all right, honey? You look well. You look like I did the day I lost my husband." I shook my head, embarrassed. It's just been a bad week. My mom's here. She needs heart surgery, but we don't have the money to pay for it. I don't know what to do." For a moment she studied me, then slowly sat down beside me. "You're the girl who gave me bus fare when I had nothing in my pockets. You didn't even think about it, did you?" I shrugged. "It wasn't a big deal. It was to me," she said firmly. "That day my grandson was hurt in an accident. If not for you, I would have missed seeing him awake for the first time." She looked over her shoulder and waved. "Benjamin, over here." A tall man in his late 20s walked toward us. He had kind eyes and carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who'd been through hard times and come out stronger. "Grandma, who's this?" he asked, smiling. "This is the young woman I told you about, the one who helped me that day," she said proudly, as if I were family. "And she needs help now." I wanted to protest, to tell her she didn't owe me anything, but the words stuck in my throat. Ben sat down on my other side. "Tell me what's going on." Something about his tone, steady, no judgment, broke whatever wall I had left. I explained everything. Mom's worsening heart condition, the cost of the surgery, the dead-end calls to charities, even Tyler's refusal to help. My voice cracked more than once, but I kept talking until there was nothing left to say. Ben didn't hesitate. "How much do you need?" I blinked. "What?" "No, I'm not asking you for money." "I know you're not," he said calmly. "But I'm offering. My company's doing well, and honestly, it's the least I can do. You helped my grandma when you didn't have to. You gave her dignity that day, and I don't forget things like that." Tears spilled over my cheeks. "Ben, it's too much. I can't." He shook his head. "You can, and you will, because this isn't charity. It's an investment in someone who clearly deserves it. Your mom deserves to live without worrying if her daughter is drowning in debt." Mrs. Miller placed her hand on mine. "You helped me see my grandson. Now let us help you keep your mother." For a long moment, I just sat there holding both their hands, overwhelmed by the sheer kindness of strangers who suddenly didn't feel like strangers anymore. Ben pulled out his phone. "I'll call the hospital billing department and make arrangements." "And Natalie, what do you dream of doing besides worrying about bills?" I hesitated, then smiled shilly. "I've always wanted to open my own bridal studio, designing custom dresses instead of just altering other people's work." He grinned. "Perfect. Once your mom's healthy, we'll talk about that too. I know a few investors who love supporting local talent." I stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that for me?" His expression softened. "Because kindness deserves to be paid forward, and because you remind me of my grandma. Quiet strength. Even when life's unfair, people like you, you're rare." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind, but something real, steady, like the first warm day after a long winter. As we walked back into the hospital together, I glanced at the gray sky outside and felt something shift inside me. Sometimes life breaks you so you can see who's truly there to help pick up the pieces. The surgery was scheduled for the following week, and thanks to Ben's immediate intervention, the hospital cleared the financial hold in less than 48 hours. I couldn't believe it when the billing manager called me directly to confirm. "Your mother's surgery is fully funded. You don't need to worry about payment." I sat there in stunned silence before whispering, "Thank you," over and over until my voice gave out. On the morning of the procedure, Mom gripped my hand as they wheeled her into the operating room. "Natalie," she said softly, "don't let this scare you. Life has a way of turning pain into something beautiful. You just have to let it." I smiled, though tears blurred my vision. "I'm not scared, Mom. Not anymore." The surgery lasted 6 hours. I paced the waiting room, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Ben and his grandmother stayed with me the entire time, bringing coffee, making quiet conversation, even distracting me with funny stories about Ben's childhood mishaps. It felt surreal how only a week earlier they were strangers, and now they were a lifeline. Finally, the surgeon walked out with a tired smile. "It went perfectly. She's stable and resting with proper recovery. She has an excellent prognosis." Relief crashed over me like a wave, leaving me shaky but lighter than I'd felt in months. I thanked him, thanked every nurse in sight, and then collapsed into a chair, crying, not from fear this time, but from sheer gratitude. The next few months passed in a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and slow recovery milestones. Mom grew stronger each week, her cheeks gaining color, her laugh coming easier. Only after 3 months did her doctors confirm she could return to her normal daily routine. She kept saying, "I feel like I've been given a second life." True to his word, Ben didn't disappear after writing a check. He visited often, bringing flowers for Mom and coffee for me, asking about my dream studio like it wasn't just idle conversation. One afternoon, while Mom was napping, he sat at our tiny kitchen table, spreading out some documents. "I wasn't kidding about investing in your future, Natalie," he said. "I know you want your own bridal studio. I want to help you make it real." I stared at him, stunned. "Ben, you've already done too much." He smiled. "You call saving a life too much. This is nothing. I've seen your work. It's incredible. You don't just sew. You create moments people never forget. You deserve the chance to do it your way." It took some convincing, but eventually I said yes, not because I wanted charity, but because I finally believed I was worth believing in. 9 months after my mom had fully recovered, Cooper Bridal finally opened its doors in a cozy downtown space. It had taken months of planning, licensing, renovations, and building my client list. But at last, the dream was real. Mom stood beside me at the ribbon cutting, tears in her eyes, holding a bouquet Ben had given her. That day, as I looked at the small crowd cheering us on, friends, clients, even Ben's grandmother, I realized something profound. Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who shows up when everything falls apart. Ben became a constant presence, not just as a business partner, but as a friend, and maybe something more, though we never rushed it. There was comfort in the slow, steady way our connection grew, rooted in trust rather than infatuation. One afternoon, a young bride-to-be came into my shop, shy and quiet, saying she didn't feel beautiful in anything she tried on. I worked with her for weeks, creating something just for her. When she finally tried on the finished gown, she burst into tears. "I feel beautiful again," she whispered. Those words stayed with me long after she left because they echoed my own journey. I'd felt broken and small, unworthy of love or dreams. But through kindness, both given and received, I'd found myself again standing in my studio, surrounded by silk and lace. I thought about Tyler for the first time in months, not with anger, not with regret, but with a kind of distant gratitude. If he hadn't failed me, I might never have walked the path that led to this life, these people, this healing. Sometimes heartbreak isn't the end. Sometimes it's the push you need to discover where you truly belong. And as I watched my mom laughing with Ben's grandmother in the corner, both of them healthy and full of life, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And it all started with one simple act of kindness on a rainy bus ride. One moment that proved the world can still surprise you in beautiful ways.